Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about WAN selection, firewall selection, these sorts of things. You have an organization, it needs to access the internet. How do you set that up? Better yet, what if you have multiple locations? Let's say you've got, 3 offices. They all need to connect to the internet. How do you sort this out? What are the questions that a network admin would ask? This network admin specifically. So it starts with, what are the capabilities that are needed for how many people? Very basic. This is all about making sure that you gather the right information so that you spec the correct system down the road. But it's things like, do you need a VPN? Do you need any sort of remote access? Because there's been lots of times where people will say, oh no, we don't need anybody to have a VPN. There's no file shares here. Everything is in the cloud. Oh, except for the maintenance guy who needs to be able to connect to the alarm system. Or, oh, you know what? Actually, it would be really nice if the CEO could have access to the camera system so that they can assist when managers call them in and ask for information and such. Okay, well, all of this remote access is going to have to be done through a VPN. That's what they're there for. So VPN and, just all remote access, whatever type it is, however they want to call it on the client side. We're the network admins. We'll call it by what it is, a VPN. Filtering. Do they need filtering? What kind of filtering do they need? And this is a very broad category. Usually when I say filtering, what I'm thinking about is content filtering. Your standard web and application filtering. I want to make sure that people can't go to swimwear websites or lingerie websites or anything like that. I want to make sure they don't go to gambling websites, or, I want to filter out illegal drug use, but this is a care facility, so we need to make sure that the nurses can actually look up regular drugs. Applications, we want to restrict AI tools, or we want to restrict instant messengers, or we want to restrict file sharing tools, whatever it is. That's all, in my mind, part of content filtering writ large. But there's other types of filtering that could be done as well. Some of which, for example, DNS filtering, I do not recommend that at all. Because DNS filtering works great until something gets miscategorized. At one point, I had been using OpenDNS with no specific filtering configuration set up, just regular OpenDNS. And one morning, they decided that all Canadian banks were going to be blocked now. I switched to, Google Public DNS, and because it still resolved all the websites, the banking websites that our clients needed to reach to, do payroll and banking and all the other stuff that they need. Okay, well, that turned me off of OpenDNS, and that turned me off of DNS filtering in general as well. So I don't recommend it. But if you need to do DNS filtering, you need to, at least have that requirement on the table so you can build the right system to do so. TLS inspection, also something that I do not recommend whatsoever. TLS inspection, of course, that a standard SSL or TLS certificate is designed so that the website has the certificate, and it goes back to, it's signed by the intermediate certificate authority, it's signed by a root certificate authority, and that's all good. Okay, cool, fine. And the chain of signatures means that unless somebody has access to the private key, then they they can't, break that communication. And the reason I don't recommend this is clients and users rely on that. Very much so. If you're connecting to a bank, your client wants to know that their connection to that bank is secure and is not being snooped on. It's not at risk of an attacker snooping on it either. But if you have a filtering system and it's supposed to do full TLS content inspection, how do you investigate this connection then? Well, any TLS content inspection is going to have its own certificate authority that it needs you to install on all the user workstations. And then it will use that to dynamically create fake certificates for all websites on the fly. So somebody goes to Google, guess what? Your firewall is going to generate a certificate for Google so that it can unpack and filter everything within that secure connection. The same is true for your bank, whether it's RBC or BMO or US Bank or Tangerine or whoever. Your firewall will generate a fake certificate for that, because it chains back to its own certificate authority, which is now trusted by all of your user workstations. You can do full TLS content filtering. It's risky. If your firewall is ever compromised, guess what? There's a significant chance that attackers can now generate trusted certificates for any website in existence, and your users will trust it because they don't know any better. And conversely, how much do you really need to filter all HTTPS traffic? As network admins, we have a lot of insight into the traffic. We can see what ports are being used. We can see what the destinations are. We can do reverse DNS to see what those destinations are registered as. And we know that there are other tools. For example, Tor has a list of all known exit nodes so that website operators can use those to filter traffic coming from these proxy nodes. Lists also exist for other VPNs all over the place. These are proxy servers. These are VPNs. You can't necessarily trust the traffic coming from them. We have all of these tools available. Is it necessary then to break HTTPS? Because that also requires a lot of processing power to dynamically generate certificates on the fly, decrypt the legitimate traffic, and then re-encrypt the traffic that's going to the user workstation after it's been filtered. It requires a fair amount of processing power, and I don't think it's particularly a great thing for networks to be doing. If you have a need for it, whether it's regulatory or it's just something imposed by management, and you can't argue against it, or your argument was unsuccessful, then maybe that's a capability that you need to plan for. Okay, so this is all under the general category of filtering then. But once you have a list of all the capabilities that you need your WAN connection to have, then you need to think about how you're going to architect this network. Do your multiple offices all need to talk to each other for any reason again? If they do, then you might need site-to-site VPNs. Okay. Are they all going to forward site to the internet separately? Or are they going to all relay traffic to a central site with one big filtering system? Which means that you're also going to have to accept some latency penalties there in order to make sure that it all works? Or are you going to do a hybrid architecture? Something, for example, where you have one block of IPv6 space that goes to one location and then you VPN that out to the sites, whereas IPv4 traffic just goes directly from the sites. Which would be highly unusual to set up as an actual client customer network. It's what I'm going to do for my home network, but I mean, that's a separate thing. But you have to put some thought into how you're actually going to architect this thing. And then you know how it's going to be put together, and you know what capabilities you need at which sites. And then you just start to build it. I would start with my list of known firewall vendors that are good and not compromised. Insurance companies in my area are openly telling my customers, at least, not SonicWall, not FortiGate. Not SonicWall, not Fortinet. Just avoid those two as a start. And you go, okay, so not SonicWall, not Fortinet. What am I going to do? I personally would throw anything that says AI anything out of consideration, because I don't know why I would need AI in a firewall. Machine learning for categorization of traffic, maybe. There's a place for machine learning, but AI, get out of here. So from that, where I've been moving to personally is a lot of OpenSense deployment, because it's a stable system that you can add plugins to for VPN, for filtering, for intrusion prevention, for whatever you need. And then you just figure out the details of how you're going to build it from there. There's nothing saying that you couldn't use, a different big name vendor like a Cisco ASA. I know of the Cisco ASAs. Heck, I took a firewall course that was entirely based on PIX, which was the predecessor to the ASAs. And it's always been a massive pain because Cisco routers start completely open and then you progressively lock them down as necessary, versus a PIX, which starts completely locked down and you have to forcibly open it up little by little. And it just leads to some weird things when you're used to approaching it from the other direction entirely. But they work. They are effective. I've used Untangle. Used to use Untangle a lot. But their IPv6 filtering capability, they said, okay, we're going to start it in 2011 and we're going to have it out by 2014. And as of 2024, they still didn't have anything. If you wanted to use IPv6, great, but they couldn't filter it. So I threw that out of consideration as well. And I think now it's Arista. But yeah, no, I'm not doing that again. For me, the things that I'm looking at, number one, I call it basic table stakes that it has to do full IPv6 filtering. The protocol has been out for so long now. If your product doesn't offer it, then it tells me you're not serious about networking at this point. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And I lump other solutions that I have seen, for example, Citricom Control 1. Something we were looking at. It's an overlay network similar to Tailscale, but it includes a filtering appliance in the cloud so that you have one filtering solution for all of your users. Sounds like a great idea. No IPv6. So clearly not ready for a modern network then. And, then there's other things that come into it, like static IP addresses. And I'll use Citricom here again as a great example. They only offer Canadian IP addresses in Chicago. I'm nowhere near Chicago. You're telling me that I can only get Canadian IP addresses for my clients if I tell them, and then you're going to have the latency penalty of routing all your traffic through Chicago, because that's it. Or you have to be identified as US customers and, have a cloud location in Seattle. Where are these cloud locations? Which cloud provider is it in? Doesn't say. So you can get virtualized firewalls or overlay networks, but where are these locations? Where is the data flowing? How much latency are you going to incur? If I then turn and look at Tailscale, which I would normally use as a VPN, but it's an overlay network, I go, okay, well, what latency is this overlay network going to add? Not a whole lot, as it turns out. Because even if you're going through a DERP relay, you only have to go through a relay if it's unable to establish a point-to-point connection between the source and the destination. So under most circumstances, everybody who's using Tailscale as a VPN is going to go point-to-point from wherever they are to wherever the endpoint is. If the endpoint is a corporate router, let's say they're doing an exit node and they're going through a corporate router so that their traffic is filtered, okay, that's perfectly doable. It'll just be the latency of a point-to-point connection. It will not have to go through there and then bounce up into the cloud somewhere to actually hit a filtering appliance in who knows what cloud. And because Tailscale is built on WireGuard, it absolutely supports IPv6. And that's another bonus to me. Other things to consider: VPN. What type of VPN are you going to implement? Does it require 2FA? Does your cyber insurance require 2FA? If you're doing something like SSL VPN, you really shouldn't anymore. It's not secure. It has not been secure for a while. You can use something that is WireGuard based, very secure, very fast. No 2FA whatsoever. Because WireGuard as a protocol is built on just securing the connection. And each side of the connection has a key. That's just what it uses. Okay, well, that's a single factor. That's a what you have factor. It doesn't have anything to do with who you are or what you know. You can layer a different identity provider on top of that, which is what Tailscale does. It layers on an identity provider, whether it's Google Workspace or Azure, Entra ID, or Ookla, or other identity provider. And if that identity provider is configured to require 2FA, then you can do 2FA. IPsec is another very, very, very common and very secure standard way of doing a VPN. More setup required. And sometimes you can do 2FA with it. Fortinet, for example, you can do IPsec dial-up, which is their recommended replacement for an SSL VPN. You can do IPsec dial-up, which will dynamically establish an IPsec tunnel from your clients to the firewall. And if you use SAML, you can actually route the authentication through a separate identity provider. Again, in my example, you could use Office 365 Entra ID, and you could go through a conditional access 2FA flow in order to allow the user to open up an IPsec dial-up connection to the VPN. But you need to know what you need first so that you choose the right thing. OpenSense has support for WireGuard. Great. Has support for IPsec. Great. No real support for doing a SAML flow that I know of, at least, through a different identity provider. It does have Tailscale as a plugin through some fabulous work by, what was the It started with an S. Sheffield Computers? No, it wasn't. Crap, now I'm stuck on the name. It started with an S. Something that started with an S, computing or computers. Out in the UK. But the plugin was put together and it works very well. So that is an option. Then your OpenSense participates in Tailscale as a subnet router or an exit node or both. And you can have that working in that way. Does not offer good 2FA into OpenSense itself. Yes, it has a provision for TOTP, but, and this is something I've seen in several instances, I've seen this in Duo as well as an example, Cisco Duo for 2FA. If you're using a TOTP code or a standard rotating code, it requires you to concatenate it to the password. So either you type in the password and then type the code, or you type the 2FA code and then type in the rest of the password and hope you finish typing it out before the 30-second rollover window elapses, which is a training issue that you'd have to walk your users through. Or, if you have Duo, it's much simpler to just configure it with the Duo apps that you just, are you trying to log in? Yes. Okay. Authenticated. Great. Fine. Duo push. So, there's a lot of tools out there that a network admin can use for connecting all these sites together. But fundamentally, at the start, it all comes down to what capabilities do you need, not what do you want because management thinks it sounds fancy. What do you actually need, whether that's an operational requirement or a regulatory requirement or an insurance requirement? What do you need? Where do you need it? For how many people do you need it? Because that's going to affect your sizing of whatever appliance you put together or your licensing. And then what tools are available to meet these capability needs for these numbers of people at this number of sites to interconnect them together. And you just go and you hunt for something that will do the job that you need for the number of people that you need it at the price that you're willing to pay. And yeah, that's how I would, sort out how to go through and figure out what you're going to do for a WAN connection or several WAN connections at several different places. I will add, for special mention, there are some more exotic connection methods. For example, I've never used this, but at one point for a particular project, I was told that there was an option to do MPLS between sites. And that's a layer 2 connection, so that you essentially have one broadcast domain shared between both sites with some, restrictions and additional filtering to make sure that you're not always broadcasting all your traffic across the internet every single time. But you can actually form a layer 2 adjacency. Most of the time, I don't think that that's actually necessary. But if it is necessary, then you're looking at needing something very different. And you're looking at needing something that is more akin to a stretched data center network. And while I have taken a certification on that and I can understand it in theory and start sorting things out if I need to go there, I've never needed to go there. And it's a network of a different beast. So I'm explicitly not covering that, but be aware that is something that's out there should you have need for it. So yeah, There you go. Hopefully, this was useful, enlightening for you, or at least an interesting thing to listen to me prattle on for a little while about. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like to hear me talk about, or things that you would like to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door net admin, and we will see you next time.